All right. Well, the first thing I'd like to do is introduce Dory Shaner, because if it wasn't for Dory, I wouldn't have had the idea to have Bryan come, because Dory's with Catholic Charities for the Finger Lakes counties. She runs a post-adoption service up there. I know she invited a lot of folks to this meeting, so I wanted to, Dory, if you could say hi to your folks and share with us a little bit about what Catholic Charities does up in your region. We'd love to hear from you.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, I'm very excited that almost 30 of my families attended. I was trying to keep track of them as there was all these Zoom squares everywhere, but I find it's a little impossible. But yeah, and I'm really grateful to you, Pat, for brainstorming this idea with me to bring Bryan. I heard Bryan speak at your conference last summer, and everything he said about trauma in the belly, I was like, oh my gosh, I believe that 100%. And in our program, we have talked to all of our parents about that. That's one thing we constantly talk about, how trauma starts. So yes, I am the coordinator of we call it the Targeted Regional Primacy Center through Catholic Charities of the Finger Lakes. We have Wayne County, Seneca County, Yates County, Orleans County, and Ontario County. And Catholic Charities of the Finger Lakes is a human service organization that just helps families with a variety of services, from case management to emergency services to Social Security, any kind of services that we can help families. We really, really try to do. We have a lunch program in Geneva that people can come in on free lunch. Doesn't cost anything. We don't ask income guidelines or anything about that. So we're in some of the drug courts in a few of our counties, which is pretty neat. And we also branch out to Thompson County and do drug court there as well. So, and we have homeless coordinators. I might be missing one or two things. If so, I apologize. But so we have about 55 families in our program, probably pretty comparable with what you guys are doing, Pat, with, being a listening ear and resources and having support groups. So I'm just very grateful that everybody attended. And when I heard there was 150 some odd people, that just blew me away. So I'm really grateful that Bryan is coming to talk to us on two really important topics that my parents wanted to hear about, attachment and abandonment. So I'm really grateful he's going to do that. And thank you so much, Pat. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Dory. And I don't want to spend a lot more time. I mean, we're co-sponsoring we're the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition of New York. I think most people know that. So I just wanted to share with you how I became friends with Bryan Post. The information about brain development, trauma, stress, how it affects our kids' behaviors and the things that they do, that information has been available since the late 90s. But we never knew about this information. Me and people like Chester and the organizations that were working in the late mid-90s, 2000s, we didn't learn about this information until a couple of folks, Bryan and a partner, his Heather, put a book together called Beyond Consequences, Logic, and Control. And they brought the strategies and the understanding of why children who have stress and trauma in their life and suffer from abandonment and attachment issues from early life traumas, they brought that to the regular people in our field. And that was when he brought it to us about 15 years ago. But it didn't really take hold until the mid-teens, really, where people universally in our field has accepted a lot of the principles that Bryan's going to be talking about tonight. And it's in no small part because he found this information, he put it together in a way that is comprehensible by the regular folks, and has really transformed our field. Bryan, you could talk about all your other credentials, but I just wanted to start out by saying we are in the presence of an innovator and a person that I truly believe has transformed our field. And ladies and gentlemen, Bryan Post.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat. And thank you, everyone, for joining me this evening. I hope to be able to bring you some insights and some inspiration and share with you some things that are useful for your work with your children.
Chat.
What's that?
Vin, you gotta go on mute now.
Okay.
Sorry, Bryan.
All right. No problem. No problem. So I hope to share some good stuff with you guys this evening. Thanks for having me. We're talking about an evening, talking about abandonment and attachment. And it's pretty exciting to think that, parents are out there being able to talk to one another and share and really be able to process with one another, because this whole parenting adopted children, it is quite a journey, and it is not for the weak of heart, that is for sure. And so we've been doing this, as Pat said, at the Post Institute. We incorporated in 2000, and I graduated with my master's degree in 97, and by 98 I was already steeped in the decade of the brain, which was the 90s, and have spent almost my entire professional career working with children and working with families and working in and around adoption. And so Christy, my partner with Post Institute, we founded the Post Institute as a online resource for families and professionals around the world to try to create a different understanding, and I like to call it a different paradigm for the way that we view children. And today, in addition to still doing stuff for the Post Institute, I'm the clinical director of a wraparound agency in Northern California called Parents in Training. And we serve about 50 families, all adoptive families, all at-risk adoptive families. And I'm just in that every single day, more or less. And it's rewarding because as a clinician, I've always been a clinician. I became a lecturer, I became a speaker, I became an author, but I've always been a practitioner. And that started all the way back in my own family, and we'll get into some of that. But it has always been important to me to be able to share not just brain research from some scientific theoretical place, not just parenting tools or techniques from a book that's been written, but to give you guys real life experiences and an understanding that is steeped in a real life understanding of adopted children. And that starts with myself. And it's not entirely different from what I try to teach parents in general, that if you want to understand your adopted child, even though they're adopted, you have to start by understanding yourself. That becomes one of the biggest challenges that I encounter with families. And this is you guys should follow us on Facebook at Post Institute. We do a daily show, most every day. I don't do it as often as I used to. I've been taking a little bit of break, but Christy still puts together some wonderful stuff. We have hundreds and hundreds of free videos that you guys can follow. And then I've written several best-selling books. I've actually written and co-written 13 books altogether, but all 3 of these were adoption bestsellers. And so I've been doing this for a long time, and it's steeped in this understanding that starts with myself, from the standpoint of my own family, from the standpoint of my parents, from the standpoint of the sister I grew up with, even all the way to my biological parents, who I've been in reunion with for the last 10 years. And so even that experience over the past 10 years has helped deepen my understanding of adopted children and the way they are wired and the struggles that they have, and then how that breaks down to the struggles that show up in the family and with parents. And I have my own adopted son. He's 27 years old now. It seems like he's really old. I first met Kevin when he was 15, and he came to live with Christy and I in our group home. And then when we moved to back to Oklahoma, he came with us at the age of 18 because he didn't have any other family, because he was from Honduras. And so the best of his knowledge is that he's from Honduras. He I don't think he actually knows. It's changed. And I finally told him, I said, you need to decide where you're from, because I don't care. Your mom and I don't care. We just need you to decide so we can make that association, and you can make that association. But there's no need to keep changing it. So it was almost the same with his name. I finally had to say, hey, decide. I don't care what it is. I don't care where it's from. Just decide, and let's form an identity. And so Kevin is actually now one of my family coaches out in Northern California. So he's been with me the last few days. We have a few kiddos that they like to come stay with me when I'm in certain parts of California. And if I have the opportunity to have them come stay with me or provide respite for a family that's in some kind of crisis, I'm always happy to do that. So not only, do I have my own children, I also have two beautiful biological daughters. Michaela is my 25-year-old. She's actually the manager of an app we're developing for parents. And then Marley is my 17-year-old, my youngest. She's my baby girl. But not only do I continue to work with families in their home, I've spent almost my entire career working with families in their home. I don't even like offices. I like to be right there on someone's living room couch, sitting there with them, watching the dynamics, getting right in the mix of the way things go. And so I still have kids. Like, I'll bring kids and spend lots of time with kids. It just helps me continue to refine my understanding and what I'm seeing and what I'm reflecting on. And one of the big things I always say is that we have to learn to see through a trauma lens. And it's the way we look at children. And it's the biggest problem. And I'm gonna kind of weave this presentation around, and you guys feel free to pop questions into the chat, and I'll open them, when I can, and then we'll just open it up at some point. But I really want to be able to help weave this understanding for you that makes sense, that just makes you think, oh my gosh, okay, let's really think about that for a minute. Because what I talk about, it's not traditional. And Pat says that it's a lot more widely accepted. There's a lot of research, a lot of science that's a lot more widely accepted now than it was when I started 20 something odd years ago. And people talk a lot about trauma, and they talk about being trauma informed. But I say that it's not enough to be trauma informed. We have to know how to be trauma responsive. And what I mean by that is that when we start talking about abandonment, and when we start talking about attachments, this becomes very important. Oftentimes we don't realize that the challenges with attachment, the abandonment challenges that a child may have, those are rooted in traumatic experiences. And we may associate them with the child's history being one of trauma, but we don't realize how traumatic experiences shape the brain and shape the emotional being and shape the perception, the way the child sees the world. These children don't see the world the same way you do. And let me say, I will say that I will wager that, maybe 50% of the time, or maybe even 70% of the time, they see the world in some semblance of the way you see the world. But once they become stressed, everything changes, because the lens, the reptilian brain takes over. And when the reptilian brain takes over, it's like lizard eyes. And they're looking through these lizard eyes of survival. But the problem is, and not even the problem, the challenge is that when our children become stressed and they move into survival, we as parents move into survival too. And we're talking about a concept, we're talking about two very important concepts, attachment and abandonment. And because we have adopted children, and because you all are well studied and and educated people. And I know Pat takes a lot of pride and puts a lot of hard work in helping his families and his team, helping adopted families think about things differently and see things differently and understand things differently. Chester was just talking about one of his groups, incorporating some of my videos in their weekend classes. That puts you guys on, quite a ways down the road as far as your understanding. The challenge is that we oftentimes don't realize that when we're talking about attachment is a two-way street. It's attachment and bonding. In our society, in our traditional society, in that old paradigm kind of point of view that we like to take, that traditional point of view that's based on your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and the school and the church, because this is kind of it's just a pervasive thought because it's the way we see the world. We want to focus just on the child. We want to focus just on the child's lack of attachment, or we want to focus on the child's struggle with attachment, or we want to focus on the child having abandonment issues, or we want to focus on the child having these aggressive behavior issues, these hyperactive issues, these defiance issues, this cutting, this stealing, this running away. We want to focus on all, and this isn't just parents, and that's really the bigger challenge, is that parents are really the byproduct of this understanding that professionals push forward into our society. So your understanding of your child is reinforced by the greater understanding of the professionals, of the mental health professionals. And so that creates this even bigger challenge. Because not only are you overriding your own generational belief systems, what everyone else has told you about the way children behave and why they behave this way, but you are also having to face up against a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counselor or a social worker or a caseworker or a teacher. And they all take this same reinforcing approach of focusing on the child. But Kennel and Kloss, the famous attachment pediatricians, they started their research in the 70s. They said it's not just attachment, it's attachment and bonding. Attachment is the behavior of the child to the parent. Bonding is the behavior of the parents to the child. And this is really important when we start talking about attachment. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about attachment. I'm going to dispel this evening for you this huge misconception about attachment. I grew in the 90s, in the late 90s and early 2000s. Attachment disorder and reactive attachment disorder and bonding issues. This is like the buzzword. It's like, ADHD obviously has been a buzzword for a long time, but attachment became this bigger buzz, especially in adoption. And everyone's focusing on attachment, but they're focusing on attachment from the standpoint of the child. But Kennel and Kloss said it's not just attachment, it's attachment and bonding. So it's a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. But what happens, because we struggle, and this starts with professionals, because we are woefully resistant at looking at our own challenges, looking at our own histories, looking at our own parents, looking at our own struggles, looking at our own traumas, looking at our own pain, our own fear, our own grief, we quickly move to focusing on our children. And when we do that, we're already setting a precedence. And it's a disservice, and it is ultimately a humanistic injustice for families, because we're automatically taking you in the wrong direction. The moment we start focusing just on your child, the moment any professional just starts focusing on your child, they're doing you a disservice. Alan Shore is considered to be, one of the leading attachment theorist of our times, probably the leading attachment theorist of our times. He's written several, he's a neurologist, a neuroscientist. He's written several volumes, tomes. I mean, these books are huge on affect regulation. Alan Shore says that attachment is the dyadic regulation of two people, the dyadic regulation of emotion. Attachment is the dyadic regulation of emotion. That means attachment is dependent on the ability of two people's ability to regulate stress together. Very important. Attachment is not a single focus concept. Attachment is a dually focused concept. Attachment is dependent on the dyadic regulation of emotion. Now, why am I telling you that? Because it changes everything. When you understand that attachment is dependent on the regulation of emotion, attachment is dependent on the regulation of emotion. A child can't be attached unless their emotional experience is regulated, and attachment is the dyadic, the ability of two people to regulate emotion together. If you don't get that, you miss the boat entirely. You entirely miss the boat. So it's so important. And I realized this 27. I realized this 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I realized that it's not about attachment. When I was 27, I was on the National Board of Directors for ATTACH, which is the Association for the Attachment and the Treatment and Training of Children. And it is a national association. So I've been doing this at a high level for a long time. I realized 20 years ago that it wasn't about attachment. It's not about attachment. When we start focusing on attachment, we are focusing on the wrong thing. Because typically when we start focusing, I'm going to tell you what the right thing is. Typically when we start focusing on attachment, we are focusing on the behavior of the child. And if you're focusing on the behavior of the child, you're missing the boat. You're being led astray. You're being twisted up, and you're being blindfolded, and you're being told to pin the tail on the donkey, because it's not about attachment. It's about the regulation of stress. Oh, this is so important. It's about the regulation of stress, because the regulation of stress, the ability for two people to regulate emotion together, the dyadic regulation of emotion is what leads to secure attachment. Not a child behaving, not a child listening to their parents or doing what their parents tell them to do, and not a parent, giving their child consequences or making them do jumping jacks or threatening to kick them out or threatening to not adopt them or threatening to take them back to the social worker. That doesn't create attachment. That actually just creates the inverse of attachment. That creates more stress. That creates more dysregulation. It's regulation and dysregulation, the dyadic regulation of emotion, the ability to maintain stress within a window of tolerance. Two people, not one, two. So when you get focused on just attachment, when someone calls themselves an attachment therapist, and you take your child to an attachment therapist, and that attachment therapist lets you walk out the door, they're doing you a disservice. You're not going to get your money's worth. It's not going to work out, because they're taking a single focus on your child, and that's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. Attachment is the dyadic regulation of emotion. Two people have to be able to regulate highs and lows together. Alan Shore says it's not just about the repair of stress. It's also about the experience of two people to have joy. Attachment is also, it's not just the absence of stress, it's the presence of joy. But what happens when we become stressed out? When we become stressed out, we move into survival. We constrict into survival. We move out of a relationship. We go away from one another. Now, you have to be able to regulate emotion. Now, here's the problem. Here's the challenge. And this is going to tie into this slide right here on the screen. We have all experienced trauma. Trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. Any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable. And when such events continue on, unexpressed, unprocessed, and misunderstood, that's the difference between a short-term stressful experience and a long-term, potentially life-altering traumatic event. We've all experienced trauma. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that, and here's what I'm going to do. I just had to stop because every time I in my head, the word problem pops into my head, I immediately don't like that word. I'm like, no, it's not a problem. It's a challenge. But no, this is a problem. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start saying, here's the problem. Here's the solution. Here's a problem. Here's a solution. Because it is a problem. It's not just a challenge. It is a problem. Here's the problem. The problem is we have all experienced trauma, and trauma impacts because it is a stressful experience. It's any stressful event, which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. And when we don't have an opportunity to express and process and understand, then that goes from being a short-term stressful experience to a long-term traumatic event. The problem is when it comes to focusing on children and attachment, even if we're focusing on their trauma, we are not focusing on the trauma and the reactions of the parents. The solution is that not only do we have to delve in and have a deeper understanding of our children and where they come from and what their reactions are and the fact that it's coming from stress and it's coming from a place of pain, but we have to be able to do that for ourselves as parents, as adults. As adults, we have to be able to dig in to our own pain and find a greater understanding of ourselves, because guess what? Guess what happens? Especially when we start talking about these. I love, Pat said, I think they want you to talk about attachment and abandonment. I said, oh, that's going to be fun. Now, most people don't think about talking about attachment and abandonment as fun. It's fun for me because this is my passion. This is what I love to do. But I know what I'm going to be able to do. I'm going to be able to tie this in to helping you guys look at this from the context of my own family. Now, here's a real quick slide. These are common traumatic events. Okay, so we get caught up in this left side. These common traumatic events: abuse and neglect, and adoption and foster care, and frequent moves and chronic pain, emotional absence, prone depression, needs. These are very common. But what we don't understand about these events, that when you've experienced these events, then what happens is that they've all occurred in the context of human relationships. And what that means is once you've experienced these events, in your brainstem is an experience that says human relationships are not safe. Human relationships are not dependable. Human relationships are scary. Human relationships are threatening. Human relationships are painful. Human relationships lead to abandonment. Human relationships lead to rejection. Human relationships lead to I'm not good enough. That experience gets stored in your brainstem. And unless you really have an opportunity, and unless you're really courageous and bold to go in and look at those experiences and feel the feelings of those experiences, then you're not going to deal with them. You're going to keep being reactive to them. You're going to keep being reactive. And so you're going to encounter, here's what's going to happen. you're going to encounter a child who has attachment challenges. And that means that child's gonna have is gonna have struggles in feeling safe and secure with you as a parent. Well, what that attachment challenge of that child is gonna do is it's gonna go into your brainstem and it's gonna stir up a past experience of when you didn't feel good enough, when you felt hopeless, when you felt helpless, maybe when you felt abandoned, maybe when your own parent walked out on you, maybe when your own parent didn't respond to you the way you needed. It's what's going to happen is your child's emotional experience, because emotion is energy in motion. I want you to think about that. Emotion is energy in motion. So really all emotion is a vibration. So your child's vibration, your child's emotional experience is going to speak to your emotional experience. Your child's fear of abandonment, your child's abandonment trauma, your child's abandonment issues is going to speak to some of your own abandonment challenges and issues and traumas. And maybe you say, well, I don't have any. I don't have any. Well, what's going to happen is the energy from your child's abandonment issues is it's going to go to your brainstem and it's going to look for something similar. And your brainstem is going to find that energy that's coming towards it, and it's going to find something it's going to match up to it. And then you're going to have a reaction. Okay. And then what's going to happen is your child's not going to be able to work through that abandonment issue in that moment because you're having a reaction. And instead of being present, it's going to cause you to abandon. It's just this really, really interesting dynamic that I want to talk to you guys about from the context of my own family. I mean, it's just a great opportunity. I was adopted when I was an infant. When I was just a couple months old, was in foster care a couple times. See right here, I have these casts on my legs. I was so bow-legged, they used to cast me. They casted me to try to get my legs straight. And I swear it has affected my legs my whole life. I was an athlete in high school and in college, and the weakest part of my entire body has always been my shins and my knees. Well, imagine if you're in some of your first and earliest and most rapid developmental stages, you're actually casted. That's no different than putting the what are the geishas, is that the name, geishas, in Japan, where they wrap their feet up really tight so their feet won't grow, because big feet are considered unattractive. So they wrap them up and it stunts the growth. And so that wouldn't be any different than for me as a small child. And it's carried, that was stressful in my body. And I feel like I still carry that stress to this day. In fact, that part of my legs, that lower part of my legs still is prone to being really sore for seemingly no reason. But I think it's because I carry trauma in that part of my body. So let's talk about this in the relationship in context of my own family. So I have my family here. Okay, these are my parents, and we have my adopted parents, the only parents I've ever known. So my mom and my dad, and then there's me and my sister. Now, we all have our family. We all have our individual families. As someone who really understands attachment and really understands the bonding and really understands stress and really understands trauma, I just want you guys to think about this. I want you to look at this. Now, I'm talking to you as a 47-year-old man, but here I'm probably 8 or 9, and my sister's, 7 or 8. You all have parents, and maybe some of you don't. Maybe some of you've been adopted, and so you have your own adopted parents. But here's what I want you to realize is that those two people, that man and that woman, they have their own history separate from my sister and I. They have their own history separate from my sister and I. Now, how many times have you thought about what your own parents' history was? Like, what was their history before you? Right? Because that history informs who you are as a parent. Now, as a child, I have my own history, right? My sister had her own history as adopted. We were both adopted as infants. But my parents had their own history. What was your mom's history? My mom was one of the oldest of 10 kids. She had a single mom most of her life, raising 10 kids in Western Oklahoma. And her mom worked, my grandmother worked 2 to 3 jobs to keep food on the table. And there were a couple of different men in the picture. But when my mom was 9 years old, her alcoholic father had a heart attack in front of her right at the table, sitting right at the table when she was 9 years old. He just died right in front of her. And it was interesting because just a few weeks ago, my uncle was here, who's my mom's youngest brother. And I heard him talking to my fiance, and he said, yep, when I was a little boy, my dad, he just laid down and he just died and didn't wake up. He said, I still kind of remember that. I was real young, but I still kind of remember that. And it was a completely different story. His understanding of his dad dying, completely different than when my mom's experience. Okay, because my mom is 10 years older than my uncle. So he felt like his dad just laid down in bed and died. Well, mom said he just died right in front of her at the kitchen table when she was 9 years old. That's a significant trauma. And then that continues on. Okay. And then you have my father. He's got his history, right? What was your father's history? And maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't know. Maybe you have to think about it. You have to generalize about it. But when you start talking about attachment, this is like where you have to start. You don't start with your child. That's the wrong place to start. You have to start with your own self-understanding. My dad was one of the oldest of 9. His dad was shot in a bar. His dad was an alcoholic, was shot in a bar. My dad dropped out of school when he was in 8th grade. He eventually went to Vietnam, came back with severe PTSD, and then he worked in a rock quarry for 35 years. So he was a very hard man. And both my parents loved me dearly, but they both brought an enormous amount of trauma to the dynamics of our family. They brought their own trauma to our family. Trauma that they had not had an opportunity to express, process, or understand. That they had never, remember, trauma being any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. They'd never been able to express, process, and understand their own traumas. And then that's just layered on top of that is my father's post-traumatic stress disorder. And he had PTSD probably for my whole life. Because he would sleep with a lamp on at night because he was afraid of the dark. He was, my mother used to say that when he came home from Vietnam, his PTSD was so severe that he would hear a helicopter and he'd hit the ground. So this is a man who was significantly challenged, and that just carried over to my sister and I. And so then you have me, right? I have always felt like I had a really good in utero experience. And when I met my mother, I found that I really did. She was really happy to be pregnant. She enjoyed being pregnant. But at 7 months old, she knew she was going to have to place me for adoption. So she had to act like I wasn't even there. So that became a big challenge for me. Okay, and I knew at some point that there was some trauma, some disruption that had caused me issues because I've had my own issues as an adopted child and as an adopted adult. But I knew that I had a good foundation. I had a good early foundation. And then, of course, I'm adopted. And then I had all kinds of behavior issues as a child because I was stress sensitive. This is something you have to understand about your adopted child. Very simply, your adopted child is stress sensitive and fearful. Stress sensitive and fearful. Okay, so then we jump over to my sister. My sister was early exposure to alcohol, probably marijuana. She was premature. She was 3 months premature. She was a preemie. She weighed 3.5 pounds. She spent the first 3 months of her life in an incubator. My mom said she could fit in the palm of her hands. And I didn't learn any of this stuff until I was an adult, of course. And so here's the thing. My sister struggled. Her entire experience with my parents was a struggle. Her entire experience. I could probably talk to you guys about the dynamics of my family. There's no telling how long I could talk to you guys about the dynamics of my family. My mom said, when we adopted you, you were smiling. When we adopted your sister, she was crying. Let's go into this a little bit deeper. So here's my sister and I as infants. And you look at the face of these infants. So as a clinician and as someone who has done a lot of study of research in the brain, I look at subtle things. And if you look at my sister's face, she's scared. She is a stressed out infant. And my mother said when we adopted her, she was crying. And I believe that defined their early relationship. Their early relationship right up front was defined by stress and anxiety. I feel like my sister was anxious her entire life. You look over here at me, you see the smile on my face, you see my eyes. I look like I'm just love drunk. Like I'm just ready for the next bottle of milk. Like I just want to be held and snuggled. And you can see it. You can see the differences between the two of us. Who's supposed to see this as parents? Who's supposed to recognize this difference? Who's supposed to understand this? We don't understand. This is back in this is 73, right? It's a 73 and 74. And you think about this now because some of you didn't have your children as infants. You've just had your child in the last 5 years, or your child is 15 years old, 15 years old, or they're even 20 years old. What was their history? What has been their history? Their history, not just from the time they were infants, but from the time they were conceived. As early as the 4th week after conception, the fetus has the ability to hear. As early as the 2nd trimester, the fetus has the ability for psychological processing. Now think about this for a moment. If now let's just get back to this attachment thing, this dyadic regulation of emotion. My mother was regulating when she was pregnant with me until I was 7 months old in utero. But at 7 months old, she became stressed. She became depressed. She tried to ignore that I was there. So I went from having 7 months of regulation, which means oxytocin. Oxytocin is your brain's anti-stress hormone. So it's flooding the womb. It's flooding the womb. So I felt peaceful. Look at my face. I felt peaceful. I was happy. I felt loved. Oxytocin is the hormone that makes us feel love. It allows us to feel love. It's called oxytocin. So I'm experiencing this in utero. My biological mother is regulating with me. I feel good. That's helping. It's helping bathe my brain in good hormones. On the other hand, my sister, her mother's obviously stressed out. She's smoking, she's drinking. She knows she's going to give her child up place her child for adoption. There's no telling what her life was, right? My sister never had an opportunity to reunify. She was always curious, always wondered, but she never had that opportunity. She never got the details. But she was obviously stressed out. Obviously, you look at my sister's face and you could tell she was stressed out. My sister's entire life was of stress. So the very first dyadic relationships for the two of us were vastly different. I had one that was a lot more secure. My sister had one that was completely insecure. And those blueprints follow both of us throughout our life. But then when you combine those with my parents, their histories and their challenges and their issues, then literally you end up with a boy who is the golden child, but still has a lot of behavior problems because he's smart, because he's social. He gets along in school. He does really well. He functions with his grades. He's liked by his friends. And then on the other side, you have a little girl who is completely alienated and isolated because of her immaturity and because of her constant overwhelm and because of some of her developmental challenges. And it completely stresses out the parents, and the parents literally emotionally abandon her from the very first stages of their relationship. So it's not even that she's been abandoned by her biological mother and that she carries those imprints, but my own parents abandoned her. Why? Because they were stressed. See, remember I went right back up here to emotional absence. Emotional absence. That is the essence of abandonment. It's not just the physical abandonment. It's not just the physical abandonment. It is the emotional abandonment. When a child is physically abandoned, they are physiologically abandoned. They are physiologically disrupted. Like their cellular system is disrupted because what they've been a part of is no longer there. So there's that. Then that psychically, energetically, is a feeling of abandonment. They're all alone. They've been abandoned. Okay. But what we don't realize is that in stress, when we become stressed, we emotionally abandon one another. When we become stressed, we emotionally abandon our children. We go away from them because when we are not stressed, we are in a place of relationship. We are in a place of thriving. When we become stressed, we constrict into survival and we go away from one another. That is the essence of abandonment. It is emotional. It may not be physical abandonment, but the child's already been physically abandoned. It's emotional abandonment. So then what happens is the child is unable to repair the abandonment insecurity because now in their adoptive family, they become stressed out and they revert to their imprints of abandonment and rejection and overwhelm and not good enough. And the parents, the adoptive parents, become stressed out and they revert to their own issues, which means when they revert to their own issues, they emotionally abandon the child. So then the child is re-experiencing this feeling of abandonment all the time. And they don't even know what it's about. They even realize it. I mean, they have no real clue because how many adopted children know that they're feeling abandoned? How many adopted children even know that they feel rejected? They don't. It's just an emotional experience because these things, these experiences are below our thinking. They are not a part of our thinking brain. This is a big issue. So I had a question up here in the chat room. I just saw another one. And it was, how can a child and a parent regulate the emotions? Oh, it's a good question. How do you regulate emotions? Attachment, the dyadic regulation of emotions. The way you regulate emotions is by recognizing in the moment, follow me here, recognizing in the moment that the other person is stressed out and that is very likely an invitation for you to become stressed out. I'll give you a prime example. The other evening, we were sitting at the house in Chico, California. I was sitting in a chair. I think I had my laptop in my lap. TV was on. Two teenagers, one one sitting at the table, one sitting in the chair. They were both messing with their phones. And then there's a 7-year-old, our little 7-year-old buddy. He's up, bouncing around on the couch, just bouncing and running around, doing whatever he does. So we're just all in this space. But it's all good because it's all regulated. I mean, he's hyper, but he's not stressed out. It's just how he how he moves his body. He has this energy in his body that has to move, so it's not stressful. So you know how when a child is bouncing around and all of a sudden they accidentally throw something and it hits a lamp or something, and that jolt, that moment of, oh my God, it stresses everyone out. See, what it does is it stresses the brain out all of a sudden. That happens. So he's bouncing on the couch and he falls back and this pillow slips out of his hands and it hits the lamp, and immediately, because I'm right by the lamp, I'm like, oh my gosh, and I catch the lamp. And I said, hey, it's time to calm down. And it might be getting time for bed, because it was getting close to bedtime. It might be getting close to bedtime. And he immediately got really stressed out. Well, he sat down on the couch. And it's just building up and building up and building up. And then he says, I don't want to go to bed. I don't want to go to bed. I don't want to go to bed. And I look at him. I didn't get up. Teenagers didn't get up. And I said, I didn't say you had to go to bed. I don't want to go to bed. I hate bed. I said, I didn't say you had to go. No one said you had to go to bed. I don't. And so finally, I just got quiet. The teenagers were looking at him, and then they both went back to doing what they're doing. I'm calming myself down. I'm breathing. I got myself all worked up because it was a moment of stress. That's automatic. It's just an automatic reactive experience. That's our amygdala at work. I calm myself down. And I just go back to doing whatever I was doing. And he's still screaming. He's so worked up. And he stayed worked up for about 3 minutes. Now, 3 minutes is a long time. For me, I think 3 minutes, that's a long time for a kid to stay worked up. Now, most parents talk about kids staying worked up for 2-3 hours. That's like, wow, that's way out there. But it's because I know how to regulate myself. I knew to stop talking to him. So I stopped talking to him. I regulated myself. I went back to doing what I was doing. I gave him his space. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to say anything. After about 3 minutes, he stopped. See, it's not that he just stopped by himself. It's that when I'm regulating myself, I'm regulating the stress vibration that I send off, that I emit. And when I start regulating and calming the stress vibration that I send off, the two teenagers, they were completely unfazed. They were as relaxed as could be. They were just doing their thing. I'm calming myself down because they're feeding off of me. If I'm not getting worked up, they're not going to get worked up. So they're feeding off of me. And what we end up doing is we end up regulating our energy. So our energy is regulated. And what happens when you start creating an environment of regulated energy? Physiologically, a stressful energy cannot grow. It's it's negative versus positive feedback loops. A negative feedback loop cannot grow in the presence of a positive feedback loop. So it wasn't that he just calmed down. It's that we created a vibration. We created an energy that supported his regulation. He got regulated. He calmed down. He stopped. He's sitting there. And after about 2 minutes, so this is all about 5 minutes. After about 2 minutes, I looked over at him. And I said, are you okay? Very gently. Are you okay? And he shook his little head. He's still, he wasn't sure what to do. He has a history in his home of this escalating. So he wasn't sure. He didn't know if he needed to continue being in survival. So then I waited about a minute and I looked at him. I said, come here. And he slowly got up and he came over and he leaned back on me and I pulled him up on me and I just snuggled him for a minute. And I rubbed his little belly and I rubbed his little head. And that's all I did. And I made some comment about, what one of the other kids was doing. And I said, go check on him. Go see what he's doing. He walked over there to see what he's doing and asked a question. Oh, he's talking about a car. I said, go see the car. And he's talking about the car. And then he was just, he's trying to make everything okay with everyone else, make sure it's good. And then he was exhausted. Then he laid on the couch. And he started getting really tired. I said, "You want me to get you a blanket?" Because we were still up. And it was like 8:30. He said, "Yeah." So I went and got him a blanket. He laid over on the couch. I put the blanket over him. And within about 20 minutes, he was passed out. That's how you regulate emotion. And it doesn't matter if the kid is 1 year old. It doesn't matter if they're 5 years old. It doesn't matter if they're 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old, or 50 years old. You regulate emotion by realizing the other person is stressed out, and you don't have to become stressed out with them. Because when you do that, when you regulate emotion, what you realize is that their amygdala in their brain, their fear receptor, the source of cortisol, is surging through their body, and it's very likely overwhelming them. This is something really, I'm going to say something really important. Well, I'm going to say a few things really important. Let me check my time. Oh my goodness. Okay. When a child is stressed out, especially with an adopted child, their amygdala is probably overdeveloped. So your child's amygdala is probably overdeveloped. Now, as we get older, we become more and more left hemisphere, more rational, more cognitive, and less right hemisphere, more emotionally tuned in. Our children are just the opposite. They're more emotional and less rational. But just because we're less emotional doesn't necessarily mean that we use rational thought and logical thought, because our emotional brain dictates to our thinking brain. When we get stressed out, our thinking becomes confused and distorted. Joseph Ledoux, New York University neuroscientist, wrote a book, Emotional Intelligence. New York University neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux is quoted as saying, "In times of stress, the amygdala pumps out the stress. In times of stress," let me get my little pen over here. My little pen. In times of stress, our thinking, so your amygdala pumps out the stress, your hippocampus is supposed to help you think clearly and remember. Joseph Ledoux says, in times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. Now, here's what happens. This is your thinking brain. I mean, not literally, but this is your emotional brain makes up 3/4 of your brain's activity. Your thinking, your prefrontal cortex, this is only a quarter of your brain's activity. Your emotional brain dictates to your thinking brain. Your emotional brain dictates to your thinking brain. Now, when you've experienced a lot of stress and trauma, your hippocampus, which is it's like your screen in your brain, it's like your brakes. Like your amygdala is the gas, your hippocampus is the brakes. When you've experienced a lot of trauma, your hippocampus wears thin and it doesn't brake as effectively. Whereas your amygdala just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Well, see, there's another part of your brain that's connected to those brakes, and that's the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is supposed to release oxytocin. Oxytocin being your brain's anti-stress hormone. So when a child is being stressed out, or even an adult is feeling stressed out, they're supposed to be able to breathe through the stress, which turns on the oxytocin, which then calms the stress, which instead of creating a confused and distorted thought impulse, it creates a coherent impulse. But if the child has trauma and the child has a lot of stress, it stirs up the brainstem, because all the trauma is stored in the brainstem. When the brainstem gets triggered, then it just comes up here because the brakes are no longer effective, and it creates all these confused and distorted belief patterns. See, when your hippocampus and your hypothalamus and your oxytocin response are working effectively, when they're working effectively and you have a cortisol reaction, they kick in, and instead of your brain, your limbic system getting completely overwhelmed and sending out these confused and distorted signals, your hypothalamus kicks in, releases oxytocin, calms down the stress, and it sends a clear and coherent signal. It's the difference between listening to a static radio versus listening to a clear station. That's what happens in your brain. in times of stress, we regress. An acting out child is a stressed out child, is a regressed child. An acting out child is a stressed out child, is a regressed child, but you can't become regressed with them. As the parents, if we become regressed with them, then we're acting out from our own earlier emotional place. And when I say we stress, we regress, what I mean is we regress to our zone of emotional comfort. Like we regress back to a younger age. It's called a being having an amygdala hijack, or being developmentally arrested. When you have a trauma in your life, or you have a really stressful situation in your life, you hit that creates a developmental zone of comfort. So your developmental zone of comfort is everything up till that traumatic experience. So what happens when you become stressed is you regress all the way back to that developmental zone of comfort. When you regress back to that developmental zone of comfort, that means you regress back to this place when this trauma occurred. So instead of being 15 in a moment of stress, you regress and now you're 5 or you're 3 or you're 1. There's research. Alan Shore did research. He actually did there was a meta-analysis done with adults that said some adults in times of stress have the ability to revert to infancy. When we stress, we regress. Now, when we're talking about adopted children, if they've been abandoned, they become stressed and that brainstem gets stirred up. They regress to that infant that's been abandoned, and there they are in this state of overwhelming abandonment, this state of overwhelming fear of abandonment. Well, as soon as they drop into that stress escalates, and guess what? It stresses the parent out. When the parent stresses out, guess what they do? They go back into their brainstem. I don't know what's in that brainstem. Only you know. Only you know what's there, but you go back into your brainstem, and then you stress out and you regress. And then you wonder, how can I help my child work through their abandonment? Well, the first thing you have to do in order to help your child work through their abandonment is you have to stop feeling abandoned when they feel abandoned. In order to work through your child's abandonment, you have to stop feeling completely stressed out when they're crying, or when they're yelling, or when they're cussing, or when they're screaming, because you don't know that's not their abandonment trauma that's coming up, right? So this is important for that little 7-year-old. He's been neglected. He's been abused. He's been left alone for long periods of time. That I don't want to go to bed, and that screaming, that screeching like a 2-year-old, that's coming from some earlier place. That has nothing to do with me. I didn't even say he had to go to bed. But he couldn't hear that, because in times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted. I have a few questions over here in the chat. Hang on just a minute. Thought I had to blow my nose there for a minute. All right, so, okay. Great, thank you. Those were not meant for me. Perfect. Okay, cool. All right, good. Okay. All right. There's another one. Let's see if that's for me. I don't want to miss anyone's questions. If you have questions, okay, great, perfect. Let's move on. I love this quote. I gotta blow my nose. Give me a minute.
Hey, you got to blow your nose. What can you say?
There she blows.
That's a pretty deep statement right there. One of the best lessons you can learn in life is how to master how to remain calm. Oh,
That's it. I can't regulate if I can't breathe through my nose. All right. So yes, this slide from Master Bruce Lee. One of the most important lessons you can learn in life is to master how to remain calm. That I have said for years and years and years, if I can only teach you one thing, if I could teach you one thing and one thing only, the most important thing that I could teach you when it comes to parenting is the ability to breathe in the midst of stress. Now, what is stress? Because, see, sometimes I say that, and because I've been doing this for so long, I forget that we oftentimes, we think of stress as being like really worked up and really overwhelmed and just really, just like, oh, I'm stressed out. But that's not stress. Stress, we can experience stress through any of our sensory pathways. Like I got on a plane. I've been up since 5. Well, I woke up at 3 this morning, and then I watched some educational videos for about an hour, and then I went back to sleep, and then I woke up again at between 5:30 and 6. And then I had to leave the hotel room and get in my car and go through security and take off my clothes and put my clothes back on, and then go sit and wait at the plane and get in the plane and wear a mask the entire time and fly here. It's like there's stressors everywhere we go. And what happens is those stressors utilize our window of tolerance. We all have a window of tolerance for how much stress we can handle. You have to train yourself. The most important thing you can do for your child when it comes to attachment and when it comes to helping them heal through abandonment, the most important thing you can do as a parent is learn to breathe when you are stressed and learn to pay attention to when you are stressed. You have to practice. You have to condition yourself. You have to breathe all the time. You have to get so used to breathing that when your stress starts to escalate, you recognize it. And the first thing you do is you start breathing. You start breathing because your ability to breathe in the presence of stress keeps your thinking clear and keeps your short-term memory activated. When you become stressed, your thinking becomes confused and distorted, and your short-term memory is suppressed. Well, your short-term memory is the place that says in the moment to moment, well, this isn't a life or death situation. No one's going to die. I mean, he's not going to hurt himself. And if he does, he's not going to break his neck. It's going to be okay. She's cursing right now, but that doesn't mean I'm going to die. That doesn't make me a bad parent. He's threatening to run away. He's blah, 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 blah. All these momentary behavioral things that kids do that all become threats for us as parents. And if you feel threatened, it's your amygdala that's feeling threatened. You're not just feeling threatened by your child like this physical experience of threat. Your amygdala is interpreting whatever you're seeing as a threat, and then it is releasing cortisol. And when it's releasing cortisol, your negative energy in your body is either expanding or you are shutting down. One way or the other. You're either expanding this negative energy, and you've seen people, you've walked around people, you've been with people who you just walk around them and they feel so intense, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's because their negative energy has grown so much or sending off a vibration, versus the person you sit by who's just so shut down and stressed out and depressed. You feel that too. You're like, oh God, it just pulls you down. You've got to be able to breathe through your stress in order to stay present. If you have a child who struggles with abandonment, listen to this. If you have a child who struggles with abandonment issues, their abandonment is in their brainstem. It doesn't mean you've abandoned them. It doesn't mean you'll ever abandon them. Their abandonment is in their brainstem. But if they drop into their abandonment and then you get overwhelmed and you drop into your own stuff and your thinking becomes confused and distorted and your short-term memory becomes suppressed, then you're not turning on oxytocin. And if they drop into their abandonment stuff, they're not releasing enough oxytocin for themselves. I always say, if you didn't get it, you don't have it, and you got to get it. And oxytocin response is a learned response in the brain. You have to learn it. The only way you learn it is you have oxytocin rich teachers who are supposed to be parents. Our first experiences from in utero on are supposed to be training our brains, to enriching our brains with oxytocin so that when we become stressed, we're able to override it and balance it out. But when you grow up in environments of stress and abuse and neglect and abandonment and rejection and all the really stressful things, your brain isn't learning oxytocin. So when you become stressed, guess what? You don't have a healthy enough oxytocin response to calm your own stress. So that's why attachment is the dyadic regulation of emotion, because one individual in the relationship in the moment does not have enough oxytocin, does not have enough regulatory ability in the moment to calm themselves down. So you have to recognize it. You have to not feel so threatened and overwhelmed that you lose your mind so that you can breathe. Keep your thinking clear, keep your short-term memory active, and stay present. When you become stressed, you go away. You have to stay present, even when that child is rejecting you. Even when that child swears up and down you're going to abandon them, you have to stay present, because it's your ability to stay present without saying a word. Without saying a word, it's your ability to stay present that turns on oxytocin in their brain. I got some messaging in the chat here. Okay. You are Buddha. Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's see. We're back up here for just a moment. All right. See how far we got to go back here. All right. My question is, we are not ignoring or pushing down emotion when we need to just let it out, like screaming in your car alone. My question is, are we not ignoring or pushing down emotions? Well, no, you're not ignoring. So when you need to just let it out, like screaming in your car alone, you need to scream in your car alone. But here's what I want you to do with that. This is so important. This is so important. When you feel like you need to scream, when you feel like you are sad, when you feel like you are mad, when you feel like you're overwhelmed, and you give in to whatever experience, whatever release your body needs to have, after you give into that release, I want you to ask yourself the question, what is this really about? What is this really about? Because you're not just getting overwhelmed for no reason. There's an experience in your brain and your body that has gotten triggered. It's gotten activated, and that energy needs to be released. And so you're releasing it, but you want to know, what is that energy associated with? What experience, what memory does that energy connect you to? Because I will almost guarantee you 99% of the time, it has nothing to do with the thing that you think it's about. The reason why you think you're upset is not the reason why you're upset. Emotional reactivity stems from unfinished business. The moment we find ourselves being emotionally reactive to anything, any person, any place, any situation, it has far more to do with our past issues than it has to do with that thing that's showing up. So no, it's not ignoring. It's you give into it. You honor it. Scream if that's what you need to do. But ask yourself, what is this really about? That's when you grow. That's when you integrate. Integrate is to connect, to pull it together. That's when you have more power. That's when you empower yourself. I struggle to regulate myself without checking out or shutting down. How do I connect and be present when my 7-year-old is anxious and stressed but remains calm? Oh, that's good. Let me read that again. I struggle to regulate myself without checking out or shutting down. Okay, so when you get stressed, When you get stressed, you actually want to check out or shut down. That's the thing. See, you think you're regulating yourself. You're actually not regulating yourself when you're checking out or shutting down. You're stressed out. That's very important. When you check out, when you shut down, you are stressed out. That is not regulating yourself. So what's happening, this is very common. When you become, see, the thing is you're not recognizing that you're stressed. What's happening is you're just checking out or shutting down. And what you've learned, what you've taught yourself, is that's how you keep yourself safe. That's how you protect yourself. See, that's just a learned defense mechanism. You're shutting down, you're checking out. That's a learned defense mechanism to your stress, because somewhere in there you found that your stress, that your need was not okay. And so you learn to just check out or shut down. And so then when your child becomes stressed, when your child who's anxious and stressed becomes anxious and stressed, what that does is that stresses you out more and you shut down, and then they become more anxious and more stressed, right? But you want to remain calm. Well, here's what you got to do. You got to do the exact opposite of what you think you need to do. When you check out and when you want to shut down, I want you to say to your child, I feel really stressed right now. I feel really stressed. I feel really scared. I feel like I want to just check out and shut down. And I know that makes you feel really scared too. I want you to just acknowledge that. I want you to just honor that. The next time you feel yourself shutting down or checking out, number one, I want you to tell yourself, I'm stressed right now. Number two, because what it's doing is it's driving your child's anxiety, and they're coming at you even more. They're making you feel helpless. They're coming at you more because they feel abandoned. They feel abandoned, so they come harder. This is what adopted kids do. When they sense that their adopted parent has emotionally checked out, you don't hear it in words. It's just the energy. They go harder at the parent, trying to get the parent to be present because they're afraid of being abandoned. They're afraid of being rejected. So what you have to do is you have to first acknowledge that you're stressed. The second thing I want you to do is I want you to say to your child, I feel really stressed and scared right now. I want you to say those words. I feel really stressed and scared right now, and I really want to check out. Because I've learned that's how I feel safe, but I know you really need me. Take a deep breath. And guess what you're going to do? It's like your anxiety is going to drop by 50% just by acknowledging it. And then you're going to say to your child, I'm here. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I know you're scared. I'm scared. You're scared. We're going to be okay. I'm not going anywhere. Do that. Do that. Watch the recording. Listen to that again. Do that. It's going to make a big difference. Daily meditation is very, very important. Yes, practice deep breathing when you don't need it. Oh, yes. Practice your breathing when you're calm, not when you're stressed. Because the very first thing is see, Herbert Benson was a physiologist in the 1970s. He wrote a book called The Relaxation Response. He discovered that the first thing we do when we are stressed is we stop breathing. We stop breathing. It's the first thing we do when we're stressed. So in order to keep breathing in the midst of stress, you have to recondition your brain. Like, you have to recondition your brain. I feel like parents, before they say anything to their child who's having whatever behavior problems, the first thing you got to do is stop and take some deep breaths. I call it the 3-phase intervention. The 3-phase intervention: reflect, relate, and regulate. Reflect, relate, and regulate. As long as your child is not at risk of harming themselves or someone else, when they're having an episode, the first thing you got to do is stop and reflect and take 3 to 10 deep breaths, more if you need it, and ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? How am I feeling in this moment? Get in touch with that. Get in touch with that internal energy that you're experiencing. Breathe into it. Breathe into it. Realize in that moment that you're okay. No one's going to die. Oh my gosh, I say this so much to parents. And half the time, I don't think they take me seriously. Because I say those words, I'm not going to die. I mean, you're speaking that to your unconscious. Why do I say those words specifically? Because in the moment of survival, it is survival. It is life or death. In an unconscious part of our brain, in our brainstem, when we move into life and death, when we move into survival, we feel like we're going to die. And your thinking's confused and distorted. So you don't really know, and your short-term memory's shut off. You're not thinking, I'm going to be okay. You're thinking, I'm going to die. So you just say, I'm not going to die. And then you're like, oh, okay. Okay. And you say, he's not going to die. By doing whatever she's doing right now, she's not going to die. But the only way you can get to that point is you've got to be able to breathe and calm yourself down. You've got to be able to breathe, and you've got to be able to regulate yourself. So you got to practice your breathing when you're calm, not when you're stressed. That's awesome, Susan. Chat says, how do you stay connected with the child and shielded from the negative feedback loop? That's a good question. That's a good question. How do you stay connected with the child and shielded from the negative feedback loop? The way you stay shielded from the negative feedback loop is by breathing. You breathe. You protect your cortisol. You protect your amygdala. You keep your cortisol. It's your amygdala that's wanting. Like your amygdala wants to vibrate with your child's amygdala. If your child is really stressed out, they are speaking to your amygdala. They're speaking to your amygdala. We send vibrations. Daniel Goleman, who was the author of the book Emotional Intelligence, talked about this back in the 90s. He said the more stressed out amygdala speaks to the calmer amygdala. And then the calmer amygdala has the ability to speak to the more stressed out one. And so you shield yourself from the negative feedback loop by breathing, by keeping yourself calm and keeping yourself present. Because the child who's stressed out, when we are stressed out, we are reacting from the past, we're obsessing about the future, but we're not in the present. The way you see shielded from the negative feedback loop is by breathing and staying present. If you breathe and stay present, then you're not reacting from the past. You're not obsessing about the future. You're just right in the present. If you're in the present, you're shielded. There's nothing to worry about. Stress can't hurt you because it's not your stress. It's not about you. It's about them. And when you feel that, that is the manifestation of love. That is the manifestation of love in action. When I can breathe and I can stay regulated and I can stay open and present and not triggered and not overwhelmed, I am manifesting the energy of love, which is oxytocin. Love is the shield. Love is the shield. The only way you access the love is through breathing. And you open that vibration, and then when you get used to doing it, when you do it enough, you don't buy into that fear as much as you used to. Because what happens is we have imprints in our brain. I mean, I grew up with a dad who was physically violent when it came to behaviors. He was physically violent. So I have blueprints in my brain for when a child is talking back, or when a child is cursing, or when a child is threatening to break something, or just any kind of behavior. I have these blueprints for violence in my brain. They're there. They're always looking for a matching energy. They're always looking to fight someone. They're always there because that's what they were. They were experiences. But when I keep breathing, guess what? That negative energy coming towards me never reaches those violent memories in my brain. That's how you shield yourself from that positive feedback loop. All right. If I feel regulated around you, we, parent and child, begin to feel attached. There you go. There you go. Attachment. I learned this 20 years ago. It's like a light bulb. I was in Canada. 20 years ago, I was in Canada. I was driving. It was early in the morning. I'd been asking the question, what attachment is a great concept, but what leads to attachment? Everyone's talking about attachment. What freaking leads to attachment? You don't just wake up attached. No. In order to be attached, you have to be regulated. Prolonged experience of regulation is what helps foster secure attachment, compounded by experiences of joy. Prolonged experiences of regulation, which is the absence of stress, compounded by experiences of joy. It's what leads to secure attachment. It's not the stress that's the problem. It's the repair of the stress. It's not the stress that's the problem. It's the repair of the stress. It's not the problem isn't that your child gets stressed out and feels abandoned. Your problem isn't that your child gets stressed out and they feel like they can't trust you and you're not going to keep them safe and that you're going to leave them and you're going to reject. That's not the problem. That's the reality of their life. That is the reality of their experience. They're supposed to feel that way. The problem is when we don't repair the stress. The problem is when we get so overwhelmed and we feel so threatened that we make them feel bad about the way they're feeling, or we punish them for how they're feeling. That's the problem. The solution is to keep yourself calm down, realize your child is working through a painful place, work through your own painful place, tell them you got to work through your own painful place too. Show up, show back up, even when you've shut down, even when you've messed up, show back up, be present, say I love you, say we're going to get through it, we're going to work through it, we're going to keep working through it, and do it over and over and over and over again, and that's how you develop secure attachment. Attachment is the byproduct of regulation. Attachment is the byproduct of regulation. If you want secure attachment, create more regulation, create more joy. And when you have stress, repair the stress. How do you, okay. I'm going to expand this a little bit. We're going to go into question mode. Let's see how much time we got here. All right. How do you teach yourself and your child to get more of the chemical mentioned that helps you be oxytocin? How do you teach yourself? Breathing is number one thing. When you bring more oxygen into your brain and into your physiology, you are naturally encouraging the release of oxytocin. Eye contact, smiles, touches, eating food together, dessert, chocolate. That's why children crave sugar, because they're not getting enough oxytocin outside of that substance. And oxytocin, sugar, represents the same chemicals in breast milk get created when we eat something sweet, which is oxytocin. It's soothing. So that's why children get so focused on junk food, because their brains are releasing oxytocin. See, we see it as just children making bad decisions. We see it as them just making poor choices, but it's not that at all. They're taking care of their bodies the best way they know how. So touch, eye contact, more hugs, I love yous, music, exercise, bubble baths, sleeping, co-sleeping. What else? Affirmations, positive words. All of those things induce oxytocin. And you have to be present within yourself. Release oxytocin for yourself, and then you release it for your child. All right. Okay, hold on. You are checking in on your parents' unfinished business. Yes, you got it. You have to, because Chester says you're checking in on your parents' unfinished business. The reason you have to check in on the unfinished business is because right after your child gets stressed out, your unfinished business is going to turn up. It is going to, boom, it's going to come on right away. Bam! It's automatic. It's in your brainstem. As soon as you're stressed, all those experiences come up immediately. That's the reaction. We all react. Anytime we encounter a novel event, anytime we encounter a threat, we perceive it as a threat. Anytime we encounter anything new, we perceive it as a threat until deemed otherwise, which means, and that comes from Bruce Perry, anytime we encounter a novel event, we perceive it as a threat until deemed otherwise, which means anytime you encounter something new, your brain immediately goes into a reactive state. It's automatic. It's natural. But you have the ability to catch it. You have the ability to go reaction, boom, catch it. Take a deep breath, take a few deep breaths, calm yourself down, and then respond. You have that ability. All right. Helpful. What about a child? Daughter is not 22, who is now other. Okay. Okay. What about a child who is now with her own, not willing to talk about any of her problems? Too much anxiety, go to work, go to school. We get along well, as long as I don't try to talk to her about her issues and effort to support her move forward. I worry that it might seem as if I have given up on her because I don't help her. We just live together peacefully, but don't work on problems at all because that brings on her lizard brain anxiety survival mechanism and she freaks out. I have not emotionally checked out, but I'm afraid it might come off that way because I have stopped trying to discuss the issues that keep her paralyzed that I know are bothering her. Key issues. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense. And you are doing the absolute right thing. Stop talking about the stuff that's threatening. Stop talking about the stuff that's stressful. Start doing more things that feel good. See if you can get her to start exercising with you. See if you guys can take a road trip. See if you guys can have more fun. See if you can give her more hugs. See if you can lay down with her at night. See if you can read her a story at night. See if you can just be present and spend more time with her and then just give it time. Stop talking about the stressful stuff. No one wants to talk about the stressful stuff. No one wants to talk about the pain. We as adults, we don't want to talk about the pain. No one wants to talk about pain. But guess what? The pain comes out every single day. Her pain is there every single day, so you got to be present to it. You just got to meet her right where she's at. You don't need to talk about it. You don't need to fix it. Just do more things that make her feel loved. Love her more. She is just now, and if this is an adopted child, she's still delayed, but she's just now getting to the part of her brain where her prefrontal cortex is her orbital frontal cortex is fully developed between the ages of 22 and 25. This is normal development. Your orbital frontal cortex, your executive control center for social emotional relationships, does not complete its development until you're 22, 25. Usually 22 for girls and 25 for boys. But if you've got an adoptive history, depending on what that trauma looks like and what that history looks like, it may be even longer than that. So you're absolutely doing the right thing, but be more present. Show up more. Love her more. I have a similar situation with my 13-year-old adopted son. If I show any concern or worry, he will lash out. It's okay to lash out. It's okay for kids to get mad. They deserve to be angry. See, and this ties into when Chester talks about the negative feedback loop. You say, honey, because you're automatic. I mean, you're mom, you're the parent. You love your child. You don't want them to hurt. You say, honey, I'm really sorry. And they start lashing out. And you go, whoa, oh my goodness. Well, what else? Golly, you must be really mad. Tell me more. Oh, don't let me say anything. Okay, I won't say anything. We'll just leave it alone. Wait. Let them work through whatever they need to work through. You come back. Honey, is there anything you need? How can I take care of you? What can I do? You enter into a relationship. He's lashing out because he doesn't feel like his feelings are a safe place. That's why he's lashing out. His feelings are not safe. So he lashes out. I know it's a paradox. It's the exact opposite of what we should do, but that's what's happening. He doesn't feel like his feelings are safe. So when he doesn't feel like his feelings are safe, he's stressed out. He stresses out. He's lashing out. He's probably regressing back to about a 2-year-old child. Going back to some history. You help your children heal through their pain in the midst of their worst behavior problems. They heal through their pain in the midst of the behavior problems, not when they're feeling good. You have the greatest opportunity to help them heal when they're feeling bad. Because when they're feeling bad, that's when their state level of memory is open. That's when their trauma is fully exposed, when they're feeling bad. Man, when they're feeling bad, that's like, whoa, I'm feeling raw, I'm feeling vulnerable, I'm feeling rejected, I'm feeling, oh my God, I'm feeling like a baby. Oh. That's when how you respond to me and how you nurture me and how you show up and how you're in relationship with me, that's when, in that moment, you're planting a seed in my brain that's just right. It's like, I call it a love weed seed. You're planting a love weed seed right in the middle of all this fear in my brain, all this anxiety, and all this overwhelm. And you just, man, I love you, and I'm just going to give you some space, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to be like, whoa, my child is still an infant. My child is still an infant. Whew. What if I'm asking this to all of you parents, what if your child is still an infant? Oh, imagine that. How would you treat that infant? How would you treat that baby? You speak more to the, let's see, the reflector. Yeah, flesh that out. Absolutely. Hey, Wayne, that's my dude, Columbia Wayne. How you doing, man? Can you speak more? Okay, reflect. As long as the child is not at risk of harming themselves or someone else, I don't think you can find oxytocin pills, but there is a spray, and actually there are such things as troches. There's a little compounding pharmacy in Colorado. They make these troches, but the nasal spray is actually, you guys will be fascinating when you get into this stuff. Oxytocin spray is the one medication that has ever been proven effective with autism. And do you ever hear anyone talk about it? No, you never hear anyone talk about it. Hang on just a moment. Hey, what's going on? Who? No, he brought food yesterday. Oh, no, he just brings it on Friday. Okay, I'm doing a webinar. I was just making sure it wasn't an emergency. All right. Yes, go buy them food. That's fine. All right, bye-bye. So I had to make sure Kevin's got my kids. Yeah, I had to make sure there's no emergency. All right. Okay. So, yes, back to oxytocin. Yes, nasal spray, autism, proven effective. You never see it. There's a problem there. There's an issue there. I actually formulated my own oxytocin supplement, brought it to market many years ago, and ended up selling that company. But I don't think they maintain it. So, reflect, relate, and regulate. Okay. Let's talk about this for a minute. Reflect. As long as your child's not at risk of harming themselves or someone else, the first thing you have to do is you have to stop and reflect. Stop and reflect. And what does that mean? That means you slow down, you take 3 to 10 deep breaths. You ask yourself, how do you feel? You try to get in touch with how you feel. And once you get in touch with how you feel, what I really want to encourage you to do is I want to encourage you to get in touch with your own stress, your own fear. And then I want you to say to your child or to your spouse, you say, I feel really stressed, or I feel really scared. How do you feel? They're usually going to say, I don't know. But as soon as they say, I don't know, as soon as, see, that's the relating. You reflect, you get in touch with how you feel. You relate by saying, I feel stressed, I feel scared, how do you feel? As soon as they say that, I'm not gonna have a chance to get into this. I'm gonna try to get into this though real quick. You say, I feel scared, I feel stressed, you must feel mad or sad. I can tell you feel mad or sad. And they will at this point. So this is the relating phase. That's when they look at you. That's when they slow down. That's when they acknowledge. See, now you're relating. I feel stressed and scared. You must feel stressed. You must feel really angry. You just acknowledge whatever it is. And as soon as you get to that place, as soon as you can relate, it's just like with the 7-year-old the other night. As soon as I realized that he was really stressed, I stopped trying to talk to him. That is my way of relating. As soon as I start relating, regulation happens automatically. The regulation part happens automatically. Now I'll give you a story because I got to tell this story in relation to reflect, relate, and regulate. So, first of all, you guys have to. I'm going to answer these questions. feartolovebook.com. So number one, Go to Facebook, Post Institute. There's so many free educational videos on there. There's no excuse to not learn more of this stuff. And I've been doing this stuff for 20 years. It's just a part of my being. So go to Post Institute on Facebook. And then you can also go here. We'll send you a free copy of my book, feartolovebook.com. We'll actually ship it to your house. All you have to do is pay the shipping and handling, and we will send that to you so you will have it at your home. You can also go to postinstitute.com. This is the company I talked about at the beginning. There's videos there. There's educational resources there. You can get some coaching there. There's support for you there. So there's that. I'm gonna back up, show that one more time. feartolovebook.com. Write that down. I'm gonna stop the share. So I was in a lecture. Well, no, I wasn't. Let me tell you, there's two parts of the story. So the first part of the story is that a mom, she said, she emailed me and she said, every single night is a bath time battle. She said, when I go into my daughter's room and I mention it's time to take a bath, she flips out on the ground, kicking and screaming. But my therapist has taught me to restrain her. So mom said I would jump on her in the middle of her bedroom floor, kicking and screaming, and I would just hold her down until she calmed down. And then after she calmed down, we would go to the bathroom. As soon as she'd see the bathtub, she'd start flipping out again. But this time she's going to take a bath, whether she liked it or not, water splashing everywhere. And she said, and we'd get that bath done. She said, we both fall out on the floor exhausted. And then, she wouldn't even go to bed. She said, what can I do about this? And I said, okay, so this is a 67-year-old adopted mom of a 9-year-old, 67-year-old fighting with this little 9-year-old to get her to take a bath. It was so bad that mom wouldn't even attempt to wash her hair. She said, I'll just take her to the hairdresser and let them deal with it. So here's what I told her to do. And as you saw, a little model came up called the stress model. The stress model says all behavior arises from a state of stress. In between the behavior and the stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There's only two primary emotions, love and fear. It's through the expression, the processing, and the understanding of the fear that we calm the stress and diminish the behavior. I never focus on behavior. I never focus on behavior because it's not about the behavior. It's not about the abandonment. The abandonment is supposed to be there. It's about the stress, and it's about the pain, and it's about the grief that's underneath the abandonment that you have to speak to, that you have to attend to. So I said to the mom who's been doing this with this child for 5 years since she's had this child, they've had this problem. I said to her, here's what I want you to do. When you go into your daughter's room, you say it's time to take a bath, and she starts flipping out, kicking and screaming. All I want you to do is sit on the bed. I want you to sit on the bed, and I want you to take some deep breaths, and I want you to get in touch with how you're feeling in that moment inside. And then I want you to let me know. I don't want you to do anything with her. You see what I just did? I completely took away all the jumping on her and all of this stuff. The only thing I want to know in that moment is, how is this mom feeling? That's all I want to know. I just want to know in that moment, how are you feeling? Where are you going? What's happening? It's all I'm interested in. So mom says, okay. So about 4 days later, she called me. I remember because I was just pulling up in front of some hotel in San Jose, California. It's funny how you remember these certain events in certain places. And I said, okay, hey, what's going on? And she said, well, I tried that thing you told me. She said, you're never going to believe what happened. She said, I went in and told my daughter it was time to take a bath. She said, she started kicking and flipping out like she always does. But this time, instead of jumping on her, I sat on the bed. I started taking deep breaths. She said, I felt like an idiot while my daughter was flipping out on the floor, kicking and screaming. But do you realize in less than 10 seconds, she completely stopped what she was doing, climbed up on my lap as if she needed a hug, realized that she didn't, and then she went and got in the bathtub. She said, that was too much for my old heart. That was the beginning of the end of their bath time battles. When I worked with that family about 6 months later, I found out that that little girl, when she was picked up by Child Protective Services, had lice so thick on her you could pick it off with your fingers. And what was mom's part? Mom's part was that when she was a little girl, her older sister used to scream in her face, and she said it would terrify her. So when her 9-year-old was flipping out, kicking and screaming, it's as if her older sister was screaming in her face all over again. And you've got two people in a post-traumatic stress cycle. All I had to do was break the cycle of the mom freaking out by the child's kicking and screaming and yelling, and breathe and get in touch with her own fear. She pulled the thread away. See, I had another mom, though, heard me tell that same story. And what's unique is that this mom also had a 9-year-old daughter. Both of these little girls' names were Christina. Both little girls' names were Christina. Oh my gosh, people are just blowing me up tonight. I gotta go. So she said, so I heard your story. I heard you tell the story. And so I thought I'd try it because I've always had a hard time with my daughter taking a shower. So I went home that night and she said, I was breathing and I was calm, and I walked upstairs and I said to my little girl, I said, honey, it's time to take a shower. Well, sure enough, she started talking back just like she always does, but she went and got in the shower. Mom said, I couldn't believe it. But so she got in the shower, and this time she does what she always does. She's, Mom's, the water's too hot, water's too cold. I don't like the soap. I dropped my towel. Mom said, usually bugs the heck out of me. But this time I went in, I got what she needed. And I said, honey, if you need anything else, I'll be right here. She said, I just sat down right there in the bathroom. She said, that was the best shower we have had in 5 years. She said, my little girl got out of the shower, had the towel wrapped around her. We went in her bedroom. I said, honey, sit down beside me. She said, I put my arm around her and I said, that was the best shower. That was the easiest shower we have had in 5 years. Honey, what are you so afraid of? What scares you so much when it comes time to take a shower? She said, my little 9-year-old daughter looked up at me and said, well, Mom, the guy who sexually molested me made me take a shower with him. Mom's still breathing, still present, still focused, looked at her 9-year-old daughter and said, honey, you don't have to take a shower anymore. You can take a bath. And this was 2 weeks later. She said, my daughter is in and out of that tub now, and I hardly even know it. It took 5 minutes to overcome 5 years of struggle just by asking, what was the little girl afraid of? So I tell you that because I want you to look for the stress and the fear underneath the behavior. And when you see the behavior and you find yourself getting stressed out too, when you get in touch with your own fear, calm, breathe yourself down, calm yourself down. Remember, you're not going to die. Your child's not going to die. It's going to be okay. Stay present for them and give them an opportunity to work through whatever struggles they're working through. And you be present, you be attuned, you be loving, and that's how you develop secure attachment with your child. Parenting is a journey. It is not an outcome. It is a process. So we are on a process, and I appreciate you all, and thank you so much. And Pat O'Brien, love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all your wisdom. It was wonderful spending a couple of hours with you. And we had a great turnout tonight, and almost everybody stayed till the end because you're just so hypnotizing. Dory, did you want to share any final thoughts with any of your folks?
I just want to thank everybody for attending. I think the information that Bryan presented was really needed for my parents. So I thank you so much for all that. And I hope.
You're welcome. You're welcome. God bless you guys. Take care.
You take it
Take
easy,
care,
Bryan.
Bryan.
All right.
Thank you, Bryan.
Yeah. Unfinished business. I love it. I love it.
Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I hope you got a lot out of it.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank
You're
you.
Thank you. That was great. It's Lisa and
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Hey.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay.